Social media made you all way too comfortable with disrespecting people and not getting punched in the face for it. Mike Tyson posted this quote back in 2020. He posted this as a reaction and a response to the oceans of hostility that people face on social media. I've seen it, and I'm sure you guys have seen it too. And although I don't quite believe that violence is necessarily the greatest solution to hateful words, I do agree with a major premise of his statement. Social media allows us to perpetuate a worldview that we hold, letting it spread to anybody who comes across our posts. Social media coddles an unnatural environment of unchecked claims, resulting in faulty and misleading information spreading rapidly with little to no limitations of what is actually true. In a first world country such as America, these ideas, especially when political, can fester within our fallen human minds. And without any outside forces keeping these notions in check, those cute little feedback loops of ignorance become something extremely damaging to the accuracy of the votes we cast. Social media severely harms America's elective processes due to its ability to rouse widespread belief of false truths. With America's future in mind, we must stand and fight against misinformation in order to preserve the integrity and the accuracy of our elections. Now, social media was designed to make connection and communication easier, whereas now it's become a substitute for face-to-face interaction, turning society's love for closeness into a love for separation. The instant gratification and the constant mindless entertainment of these platforms turn its users into antisocial drones, moving at supersonic speeds towards total disassociation. These newfound habits now, instead of only affecting our personal relationships, are now affecting the very foundation of our democracy. It's now affecting our elections. According to a Pew Research Center, in 2005, only 5% of American adults used some sort of social media. And by 2011, that number had skyrocketed to approximately 50%. And as of April of 2021, it had risen to a whopping 70%. Now I know what you're thinking, another PEP kid storming on stage telling me that I need to cleanse my mind of the evil world of social media. But I don't agree that these platforms are necessarily the root of our problems. Rather, they only serve as a catalyst for the American draw towards the complete abandonment of intellectual thought. When it comes to our elections, America relies on the voters' ability to pursue the truth. Social media clouds the vision of its users with emotionally inflammatory content and misinformation. I am in no way arguing for the complete abandonment of social media. Rather, I simply use this as a wake-up call, a warning, and an unrelenting plea to utilize our God-given rationality to effectively pursue the truth. Now, before we get started, allow me to outline the various sections that I'll be covering in this speech. First, I'll present my beliefs as to why social media is intellectually dangerous. Then, I'll explain why we need to address the serious problem of forming one's political opinion based on the popular beliefs of those around them. After that, I'll address the various dangers associated with devaluing truth in the moment. I'll explain the Bible's various warnings about misinformation and how this should change our outlook on social media as followers of Christ. By creating an artificial sense of community among users who share similar political views, social media pushes people towards an opinion that they feel is the most socially acceptable, regardless of which view is factually correct. In an article from Syracuse University discussing social acceptance and its affiliation with social media, belief systems are cultural objects in the sense that they are best described as a set of beliefs with a high probability of co-occurrence within a subpopulation that shares a cultural identity. As the author explains, people elevate the importance of community over the importance of truth. Users' worldviews nowadays keep them tied to an opinion simply because it agrees with the worldview they hold, the people they trust, rendering them incapable of listening to another point of view, even if it could be the right one. Instead of conducting their own research, many media users find themselves believing a story or a post simply because it coincides with the beliefs or their cultural identity or political affiliation. For example, in the same article, the author states, if someone tells you that the Affordable Care Act was an important step in improving our healthcare system, it seems likely that person will also tell you that there's a problem of systemic racism in the criminal justice system, that food assistance programs are critical support for people below the poverty line, or that increased regulation of firearms would address serious problems with gun violence. Here, the author uses numerous left-leaning ideologies in an attempt to exemplify their vast co-occurrence among people who identify as left-leaning on the political spectrum. This shows the human tendency to stick to what's comfortable. Instead of actively attempting to seek out the truth, we stick to what we know for fear of possibly being proven wrong. When dealing with political information online, it's easy for users to confuse actual truth with their own personal conceptions of the truth. Social media thrives on phony, filtered feelings of community, where we sacrifice what's true, resulting in a delusional American population, pathetically yet blissfully complacent in their willful ignorance. Social media is intellectually dangerous. It caters to our preconceived beliefs by showing us things we like, creating a feedback loop of things that we want to hear, which results in ignorant and uninformed votes being cast. Uninformed votes that, when left unchecked, can dismantle the efficiency of our national elections. When social media shows us things that we want to hear, we become trapped in a bubble of content that doesn't educate us, yet simply reaffirms what we already believe, regardless of whether or not that view is true. A cognitive science professor at Syracuse University asserts that the reason for this type of cognitive laziness is that different people may observe the same empirical facts, but the stories they feel best explain those facts are judged against what they already believe. Basically, social media puts everything through a filter of personal preference. We see what we want to see, even when it may not tell the full story. Due to the world's perpetual trials and tribulations, discomfort and embarrassment are often what help us learn from our mistakes and grow in wisdom. This is a direct consequence of the fall of man. Imagine you're having an argument with your mom. You forgot to get potatoes when running errands for her, even though she says that she included potatoes on the list that she gave you. You insist that she didn't. After you guys go back and forth in your screaming match for a few minutes, she pulls up a text sent 2 hours ago saying that she told you to get potatoes. Though this is a slightly fabricated example, I can assure you that my mom sitting in the audience has many of real examples that she could share if given the chance. Please don't give her this chance. But all this aside, wouldn't this embarrassing moment prevent you from being so arrogant and stubborn in the future? Wouldn't you check your facts next time before insisting that you're in the right? Social media gives us the ability to bypass these types of embarrassing situations, leading us to coddle our own minds in an unhealthy environment of constant affirmation, never being forced to acknowledge when we're in the wrong. In the book titled The Coddling of the American Mind, Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt write, "Free speech and the ability to tolerate offense are the hallmarks of a free and open society." In this statement, these authors heavily stress the cruciality of being open to learning new information. Social media, however, cuts us off from differing points of view, creating one-sided political beliefs. The online world is a slippery slope, where people hide from the truth and shower themselves in countless affirmations of what they already believe to be true, creating an ignorant and misinformed community of voters. When it comes to our elections, social media manipulates our innate abilities to reason by feeding us information that supports our own beliefs regarding election and political candidates. Social media platforms tell us what we want to hear. Why? Because when we like the content we see, we become more likely to utilize these platforms. I think we know what that means for these companies. In a meta-analysis of 51 experimental studies, Peter Ditto, a professor of psychological science at the University of California, found that liberals and conservatives were both likely to evaluate information more favorably when it supported their own political beliefs. Social media will always aim to show you things that you like, whereas traditional news sources are usually forced to provide some sort of look at both sides, whether they want to or not. Social media companies aim to feed the desires of your mind. When we like and share political news, we're more likely to be shown stories and articles that possess these same points of view, causing us to fall into a trap of informational complacency. For example, if Instagram determines that you like a particular type of content, such as the NBA, it'll do its best to show you other similar content that it thinks you will also find interesting, such as posts from the LA Lakers. You guessed it. After liking, sharing a few posts or tweets, social media feeds you election news it knows you want to hear. This creates closed-minded populace, unable to think critically or effectively reason. What makes American elections effective is their reliance on the competence of the voter. Yet when voters hear one side of the story, this results in uneducated and ill-informed votes being cast. Due to social media's tendency to cater to preconceived notions, the spread of political news on these platforms results in a less knowledgeable base of voters. With social media's main use being entertainment, people relying on social media for political news find themselves uninformed when it comes to important elections. Amy Mitchell, an analyst for Pew Research, writes that these U.S. adults who rely on social media for news tend to be less likely than other news consumers to closely follow major news stories, such as the coronavirus outbreak in the 2020 presidential election. And tied to that, this group also tends to be less knowledgeable about these topics. This utter ignorance of important political news inevitably leads to a rise in incompetent votes due to a lack of knowledge of crucial political events. I recently had the privilege of interviewing a friend studying journalism at Ohio University. Though we share completely different worldviews, when asked about his studies and experiences involving political information found on social media, he made the statement that people are so content with hearing one side of the story. There's no attempt to dig deeper or to develop a true understanding. These incompetent voters, rather than remaining stagnant, will spread faulty views to others using these same platforms. These people's views continuously feed off of each other, endlessly multiplying into massive groups of politically uninformed votes, producing election results that are fueled by the ignorance of the people and not the merit of the candidate. Kristen Weir of the American Psychological Association states that where ideological bias exists, this bias is typically caused by intuitive processes rather than by actual reasoning. In simple terms, America's appeal to reason is hindered by the ease of social media. After all, it's much more convenient and comfortable to retain our current political opinions than to actually expand our knowledge and perhaps change them. Without expanding the horizons on which we acquire political information, we entrench ourselves in a single set of beliefs, rendering ourselves incapable of being persuaded. Well, Gavin, these platforms may have some faulty information, but at least it provides a place where we can exercise our freedom of speech, right? Wrong. When it comes to social media, these companies claim to censor speech on the ground that they are private, abiding with the Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. However, recent developments in our country show us that our own government has been attempting to censor the free speech of citizens on these platforms. The federal government's involvement in censorship on social media only further undermines any confidence we should have on these platforms as a legitimate or credible news source. In December of 2022, the U.S. House of Representatives gathered evidence that had been released by Elon Musk following his purchase of Twitter, showing that Twitter's Safety, Content, and Law Enforcement Division, or SCALE Division, had instituted a reimbursement program in exchange for devoting staff hours to processing censorship requests from the FBI. In other words, America's Federal Bureau of Investigation was exposed for playing an active role in censoring election information and political opinions that they said you couldn't see. This blatant evidence of social media's ties with the federal government should be a wake-up call to anybody using these platforms. Your government may now have the power to silence you. This report also states that these communications occurred before and after the 2020 and 2022 elections, and at least one prominent FBI official expects that these censorship operations will continue in advance of the 2024 elections. Now, this should be frightening to anybody who values the sanctity and security of the elective processes in the United States. If the government is censoring the election information that you see on social media, how can we possibly know that we're seeing the truth? We are now living in a country where our government wants to control the media that we consume on a daily basis. We are now living in a country where speaking the truth is often labeled as extremism, and conclusions drawn from emotion and opinion are often labeled as facts. We're now living in a country that often seems like less of home of the free and more like the beginning stages of a dystopian novel. Government censorship is where tyranny begins. And now more than ever, we have to stand up for the truth. George Orwell sums up this assertion perfectly in his dystopian novel 1984 about a broken society that had fallen into the clutches of a tyrannical authoritarian government. Orwell states, "Until they become conscious, they will never rebel. And until after they have rebelled, they cannot become conscious." Orwell uses this quote to stress the idea that in order for a tyrannical government to succeed, citizens must be lied to and kept in the dark. Unfortunately, the oceans of false truth and political misinformation on social media clouds our vision from seeing the light of truth. Do not be kept in the dark any longer. In a country where government control is becoming more and more prevalent, we must hold fast to the truth and stand strong for free speech when it matters most. Though many people still support the spread of political influence on social media, the vast amounts of intentionally inflammatory content and untrue claims completely discredit the honesty of these platforms. Throughout 2020 into 2021, we saw a massive spike in all types of activism, whether it be claims of racial injustice, LGBTQ discrimination, or anti-police propaganda. There was a secular social media account who was talking about it. But not only were they talking about it, they were encouraging others to spread their message. In June of 2020, there were 300 to 500 new petitions posted daily on social media, with the majority having to do with the mislabeled murder of George Floyd. When George Floyd's autopsy was released, labeling his death as an overdose due to lethal amounts of methamphetamine and fentanyl in his system, the outrage continued. Social media had invoked such a powerful emotional uprising that no amount of newly developed facts could calm the strength of the mob. In an article from Louisiana State University on fake news and disinformation, states, "The combination of evolving events, sustained attention, and most of all, deep existing divisions make this moment a perfect storm for disinformation. Elections are frantic times, we all know that, full of political unrest and constantly new information unfolding. During elections or any times of political or societal excitement or uproar, social media becomes a hodgepodge of misinformation and propaganda, making it incapable of properly educating the American public." Now, the author goes on to say, "The circulation of mis- and disinformation during civil unrest can cause confusion, stoke tensions, and distract from factually correct information. When it comes to making educated decisions on who to vote for, the last thing we want to do is throw ourselves into the politically driven, emotional screaming matches taking place on social media. Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook can easily go from a useful tool for communication to a disgusting disease of disinformation, affecting the minds of young and old voters all over the country. God clearly possesses a powerful hatred for lies and boldly declares our duties to be ambassadors of Christ, seeking the truth at every corner. John 1:6 says, "If we say we have fellowship with him while we walk in darkness, we lie and we don't practice the truth." In this verse, John shows us the importance of truth on our journey towards sanctification, telling us that faith without the truth is often not really faith at all. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15, Apostle Paul instructs, "Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow in every way into him who is the head, into Christ." Christ is characterized in this verse as the truth that we must pursue at every corner. We are in the world, but we're not of it. While we await our perfect home in heaven, we need to make this country a better place for the many generations of Christ's children to come by fixing our sights on what is true. Go out of your way to find the answers, even when it might be inconvenient. Don't rely on the world to educate you, because it won't. Learn your information for yourself. Scripture urges us to root out ignorance and misinformation that we witness, spreading truth whenever possible. In order to heed this instruction, we have to utilize the wisdom that we find in Scripture and effectively discern truthful words from lies. This is America. There's no one coming to save us when our own ignorance uproots the very freedoms on which we rely. If our own negligence and ignorance causes our country to fail like so many others throughout history, who's going to come to get us back on our feet? The answer is no one. Social media is a breeding ground for misinformation. It fills our minds with these kinds of propaganda that are extremely detrimental to the future of our democracy. These untrustworthy platforms destroy our desire to reason for ourselves and close off our minds to other points of view. Do we want ignorant votes to guide the future of this country? On that dreaded day when the red, white, and blue no longer brings feelings of freedom and triumph, yet instead makes us yearn for what's been lost. On that dreaded day when our national anthem brings tears of regret, not tears of happiness and unrelenting appreciation. On that dreaded day when the very rights that those before us fought so hard to protect are shamefully stripped from our hands, will you have been on the right side of history? Will you know that you had done everything you could to stand up for the truth and the betterment of this country? Social media is an enticing trap, luring us in with feelings of community and then attacking our minds with worldly lies and misinformation. In the wise words of St. Athanasius of Alexandria, if the world is against the truth, then I am against the world. Thank you.